National Skills Coalition State Policy Director Brian Wilson and State Policy Analyst Brooke Durenzis are joined by state workforce policy experts to discuss new workforce policies enacted in 2014 legislative sessions in more than a dozen states. We will highlight policies championed in 2014 legislative sessions and include perspectives from several experts discussing both challenges and opportunities to advance policies that will address the skills gap. For those unfamiliar with National Skills Coalition, we have a vision of America that grows its economy by investing in its people so that every worker and every industry has the skills to compete and prosper. We do this by organizing broad-based coalitions seeking to raise the skills of America's workers across a range of industries, by advocating for public policies that invest in what works, as informed by our members' real-world expertise, and by communicating these goals to an American public seeking a vision for a strong U.S. economy that allows everyone to be part of its success. Before I hand things over to Brian, I would like to take a moment to thank all of our financial supporters calling in today. These webinar updates are among the many state and federal policy resources that National Skills Coalition provides for those in the workforce field, and they are made possible by the generosity of our foundation and philanthropic partners, organizational supporting members, and individual donors. We hope that those of you who have not yet invested in our work will consider joining the individuals and organizations across the country who have made their contribution to move our common skills agenda forward. You can join us at nationalskillscoalition.org/getinvolved to make an individual donation, become an organizational supporting member, or an NSC impact investor. We've got a lot to cover this afternoon, and we want to be sure to make time for your questions. So without further delay, I'm pleased to turn it over to Brian Wilson. Brian?
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm Brian Wilson, State Policy Director with the National Skills Coalition. It's my pleasure to introduce the presenters for today's webinar. Brooke Durenzis, State Policy Analyst with the National Skills Coalition. Frank Waterous, unfortunately, will not be able to join us, but for a good reason, which I will be explaining in a short while. Andrew Bradley, Senior Policy Analyst with the Indiana Institute for Working Families. Alice Pritchard, Executive Director, Connecticut Women's Education and Legal Fund, and Adrienne Parkmond, Executive Vice President, The Workplace. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brooke.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Brian, and thanks to those on the webinar for participating. My name is Brooke Durenzis, and I'm the State Policy Analyst at the National Skills Coalition. I'll be giving an overview of skills policies that states adopted in 2014. So in 2014, several states took legislative and budgetary actions to address their skills gap. Specifically, states adopted policies in at least 4 different areas. They funded increased access to career pathways. They made investments in job-driven training and sector partnerships. They also set policies to create skills systems across education, workforce, and other human capital programs by aligning program activities and outcomes data. And finally, they provided support to help the long-term unemployed get back to work. I'll give examples of different legislative actions that states have taken on these issues, but before I do that, I do think it's worth noting that many states took action on more than one of the policy issues, and in many states, NSC members and state coalitions, including those that we'll hear from on today's call, played a key part in the policy process. So first, looking at career pathways. In 2014, states adopted different types of policies to increase access to career pathways. When I say career pathways, I mean pathways that align adult basic education, job training, higher education, and basic support systems so that workers can earn post-secondary credentials and get middle-skilled jobs. So in 2014, some states funded programs that provide pathways to post-secondary credentials. For example, Alabama provided funding for local areas to align educational pathways with regional skills needs. As we'll hear later, Colorado provided funding for adult education with an emphasis on partnerships and employment outcomes. And Iowa continued funding for a program that started last year to support career pathway projects. Next slide. So policies that provide tuition assistance, particularly to working students or students who are enrolled part-time or to those in occupationally focused programs, are also an important aspect of career pathways. And in 2014, we found at least 3 states that created or expanded tuition assistance programs. Georgia increased tuition coverage for certain technical college students as well as for students that were enrolled in certain industry training programs. As we'll learn more about during the webinar today, Indiana directed financial aid to part-time adult students who are training for high-demand, high-wage jobs. And through the Tennessee Promise Scholarship, Tennessee is providing free tuition at community college and technical colleges for all graduating high school students. Next slide. So in addition to career pathways, in 2014, states also made a range of investments in job-driven training and sector partnerships. Job-driven training prepares workers for middle-skill job openings in the labor market, and these investments often support sector partnerships and help address skills gaps in particular industries. In 2014, states took a variety of actions in a variety of ways to promote job-driven training. For example, Connecticut focused specifically on manufacturing. It created a manufacturing innovation fund that's going to support several activities to advance the state's manufacturing industry. And the fund can be used to support education and training programs to meet anticipated demand in the sector. Iowa created an apprenticeship training fund. Wisconsin allocated funding for its Fast Forward program, and part of this funding can be used to provide grants to technical colleges so that they can increase the number of slots in programs that are training students for high-demand fields. Meanwhile, Rhode Island State Senate passed a resolution that directed the state community college system to work with the State Workforce Investment Board to review and expand programs that provide industry-recognized credentials that are relevant to the state's labor market. Next slide. So in addition to those types of investments in career pathways and job-driven training, states also adopted policies to measure the outcomes of workforce and education investments and to align those programs with both each other and with the labor market. Some states use legislation to direct agencies to coordinate education and workforce programs around labor market needs. For example, Alabama again created a state-level workforce council that's intended to promote industry-focused coordination between its pre-K through 12 system, higher education, and businesses. Idaho directed its State Board of Education and the Departments of Commerce and Labor to create a working group to address skills needs. And Oregon amended the functions of its state WIB with a focus on aligning education, workforce development, and economic development. So other states supported a skills system by creating policies to measure the outcomes of workforce and education programs. Indiana and Utah in particular enacted legislation to help measure outcomes across programs, across education and training programs. Iowa and Minnesota provided funding for reporting systems on educational employment outcomes of certain workforce programs that they're funding in the state. And then Kentucky put in place requirements for reporting on the education and employment outcomes of post-secondary institutions. And Maine established a task force for that purpose too. Next slide. Okay. So in terms of the long-term unemployed, as we're going to hear on the webinar, the state of Connecticut has taken action to help the long-term unemployed get back to work, and in particular is using fiscal year 2015 to invest in employment and training for the long-term unemployed. So with that, that's a quick overview of some of the actions that the states have taken in key policy areas to close the skills gap, and I'll turn it back over to Brian.
Thank you, Brooke. As I mentioned, Frank Waterous is unable to join us today. I'm going to try my best to substitute for him and talk about the legislation accomplished by the Skills to Compete Colorado Coalition. House Bill 1085 around adult education and literacy was the major accomplishment of the coalition this legislative session. One of the 4 planks in the original Skills to Compete Colorado agenda was around addressing one of the main causes of the skills gap in Colorado, which is the lack of sufficient literacy and numeracy skills among adult workers, by providing funding for adult education and linking those programs with employment and training. Colorado, back in 2011, was one of 3 states in the nation that did not provide funding, state funding, for adult education. And by 2014, it was the only state in the nation that still did not provide state funds for adult education. The core elements of the bill were to provide funding. Originally, they asked for $1.2 million. In the end, $960,000 was authorized by the legislation. The legislation also ensured that the funding would go to local recipients who are workforce development partnerships. The adult education providers receiving the funds had to partner with at least one post-secondary partner and at least one workforce partner. It's very important to Skills to Compete Colorado that this bill not be about just providing adult education literacy, but connecting adult education literacy with pathways to middle skills by linking with post-secondary credentials and with employment. The basic strategy of the Skills to Compete Colorado was to expand their coalition, particularly by gaining business partners, and to seek bipartisanship in the legislature. The majority in the Colorado legislature is very, very slim. And there's a recognition that it'd be important to cross aisles and gain support on both sides of the aisle. To do this, they wished to particularly obtain business support, and they were very successful in that endeavor. They were able to obtain the support of the Colorado equivalent of the State Chamber of Commerce. But still, bipartisanship was challenging. It turns out that in an election year in which the control of the state legislature is very much up for grabs, it is very, very challenging to obtain bipartisanship. And it was also a very difficult road to go down in the fiscal committees because the budget situation in Colorado remains very tight. Even though it's a little better than it was during the depth of the recession, still there is not a lot of state revenue to expend. The keys to the success in Colorado were direct stakeholder contact, including contact from business people with the right members of the legislature at the right time, particularly to have individuals from within district contact their own members and contacts with the more moderate members of the fiscal committees who were sort of on the fence and had to be convinced that even just providing $960,000 in state funds for adult education was an investment well made. And it's very important to stay on top of the situation during the very fast-paced times in the legislative session to make sure that those contacts were being made with the right members at the right time. And with that, Colorado, Skills to Compete, succeeded, which is why Frank and any other member of the Skills to Compete Coalition are not with us today, because actually at this very hour they are with Governor Hickenlooper, who is signing the bill into law. He happened to pick at this hour to do it. So that's a great excuse for Frank not being with us, and that's the type of excuse and the type of success we like to see. So with that, I'm now going to turn it over to Andrew Bradley, who's going to talk to us about legislation in Indiana.
Thanks, Brian. I'm here to talk today about a legislative success that we had here in Indiana for our adult and part-time students that came about in kind of an unconventional way and that we hope will lead to even bigger things in the future. So first, let me introduce myself. I'm Andrew Bradley, and I'm talking today with two hats, both from the Indiana Institute for Working Families and the Indiana Skills to Compete Coalition. The Institute is a program of Indiana Community Action Association, and we're the only statewide program that combines research and policy and analysis on federal and state legislation, public policies, and programs impacting low-income working families. And since 2010, the Institute has also staffed and co-chaired the Indiana Skills to Compete Coalition, which is made up of 25 members representing 20 organizations which includes state agencies such as the Commission for Higher Education and the Department of Workforce Development, as well as other partners including the Indiana Chamber of Commerce and the Indiana AFL-CIO, as well as other community organizations. And as I'll describe, this partnership with these coalition members was key to this particular policy victory. So the Institute has been interested in the untapped potential of part-time students, especially for adults, for a long time. But we had hit roadblocks when it came to reliable data and efforts to increase aid and support for these students. A few years back, we released a fact sheet showing that over half of Indiana's post-secondary population attended part-time at some point, and 82% of adult students attended part-time, mainly at Indiana's community colleges. But at the same time, though, part-time students were only eligible for about 2% of the state's financial aid through the part-time grant. And in fact, 98% of our part-time students attend without any award. So ideally, what we would like to see someday is for more part-time students to be eligible for the state's main financial aid awards, particularly what we call the Frank O'Bannon Grant. Last year, in 2012 and 13, we began working with legislators and the Commission on Higher Ed on the idea of a part-time reimbursable loan based on the idea from Texas's Be On Time loan that would have been reimbursed by the state, in part by successful completion on the student's part, and then in part by residential status to combat brain drain. However, we ran into some complications and we couldn't get that legislation introduced in 2013. So the next slide, this year, thanks to the ongoing collaboration we had with the Commission on Higher Ed and through their participation in our Skills to Compete Coalition, in 2014 we were offered the opportunity to include a study of the needs of part-time students to Senate Bill 330, which was a Commission priority bill. As you can see on the slide there, the bill does some interesting things for adult learners and will help focus the existing part-time grant for adult students who are pursuing a degree or certificate in a high-wage, high-demand field. The study component of the bill is going to help us fill in some of the missing demographic data about our part-time population, including their numbers, their ages, and their financial needs. Also written into this law is a requirement to provide recommendations for the state to better serve this population in the future with financial support and supportive services. So I'm happy to tell you that the bill passed both houses of our General Assembly by a unanimous margin. We do have a supermajority, but we were proud to be able to say that we were able to get support from both sides of the aisle, and the bill was signed into law by the governor. So we were pleased by what ended up in the content of the law, and let me tell you a little bit about the process of gaining support and plans for implementation. As I mentioned, we're lucky to have several key agencies at the table on our Skills to Compete Coalition, including the Commission for Higher Education, and also including a legislator from each house and each party within the General Assembly. The coalition has made increasing aid for part-time students a policy priority for our 2-year platform, so all the members knew that this was a legislative target. We were also helped by having 2 of our coalition members be named to the governor's new Center for Education and Career Innovation staff, so our message about the need for middle-skilled workforce development was getting to the right places when the administration and agency's priority bills were being decided. Okay, so next slide. Let me say, in fact, I testified on behalf of the part-time study in front of this Senate committee, and our members from the Commission and the Center went before me. They actually stole my thunder a little bit by using our best middle skill jobs data. But that just shows the extent to which we're lucky to have strong partners who have good information at the state level. So that strong partnership is going to help us with the implementation of the bill and its future repercussions. We've already had discussions about the design of the study as described in the bill and how the state will define high-wage, high-demand jobs for the part-time grant. We're also looking forward to using the findings of the study and the recommendations to boost our long-term efforts to help more students, adult students and part-time students complete their degrees and credentials, and then encourage the state to improve the financial and supportive services it provides for this population. And looking forward to future legislative sessions for that. So in conclusion, as far as lessons learned, the big lessons were really to nurture an open and supportive partnerships wherever possible, to be flexible and adaptable to circumstances. For example, when the proposed reimbursable loan fell through this study, it may provide useful information and actionable recommendations that could end up giving us a greater impact than we would have had before. So with that, I look forward to any questions you may have today, and feel free to get in touch if I can be of any help in the future.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd like to now turn it over to Alice Pritchard.
So hello, everyone. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Women's Education and Legal Fund, but also the leader of the Campaign for Working Connecticut. And I actually get to tell you about a bill that didn't quite pass, but did have a lot of support and interest this session. So I was going to talk to you briefly about our House Bill 5274, which was an act concerning unemployed individuals and discriminatory hiring practices. Our governor, Governor Malloy, championed this concept of making it obviously illegal for people to discriminate based on solely on the status of unemployment. And so we had a House bill that actually did make it through the House, but did not finish the process. It got to the Senate about 9 days before the end of our legislative session, but also did the news that we had less money than we thought we had, and so they had to go back to the drawing table on the budget. And so it did not get picked back up again. But I thought I could tell you a little bit about the bill and what it attempted to accomplish, and then maybe tell you a little bit about some of the concerns related to it. So the bill prohibits employers, employment agencies, and temporary help services from taking several actions based solely on a person's status as unemployed. And those actions include disqualifying a person from employment, refusing to refer a person for employment, or limiting a person's access to information about a job. The bill also prohibits employers, employment agencies, and temporary help services from publishing job announcements that would indicate that a person's status as unemployed disqualifies him or her for a job. Also, that an employer will not consider a person for a job based on their status as unemployed, or the qualifications for a job include current employment. The bill does not prohibit employers from doing a couple of things, which is why I think the bill made it as far as it did. It does not prohibit those employers or agencies or help services from taking certain other actions, such as requiring job applicants to hold valid licenses, registrations, or other credentials. It doesn't prohibit them from considering a person's employment history or relevant recent experience, and it does not prohibit them from asking about the reasons behind a person's unemployment. If a person feels that their rights have been violated, they are able to file a complaint with the Labor Commissioner, and they will take up civil action against that employer or employment agency or temporary help agency. A first-time fine of $500 and a second-time fine of $1,000 for each and any subsequent violations. There was a lot of interest in this bill. Our largest statewide business organization, the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, did indicate support for it, as did our AFL, CIO, and our Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. The concerns that were raised were largely related to the enforceability of the provisions of the bill. I think that they thought that the job advertisements would be a relatively easy thing to document and show as a violation, and therefore to fine a company. But the limiting their access to information or not referring them to a job as a temporary or employment agency might be a little bit more difficult to prove, and so they were worried about those situations. They were also worried, at one point there was some discussion of having this pursued by our Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, basically our EEO organization in the state, and that raised other red flags about the unemployed being seen as a protected class. But ultimately, the bill did make it through the House, which is in Connecticut, as probably other states, is not a simple thing to do. And so it did make it that far, so I would assume that we'll continue to see that kind of support for it going forward. There certainly was nay votes it made its way through a number of committees, the Labor Committee and our Commerce Committee and our Judiciary Committee. But the fact that it had strong support in the House is a good sign. I think the Senate probably didn't pick it up because it was so late in the legislative session. But it did have strong support and certainly was a major concern of our governor.
Thank you, Alice. And I'd like to now turn it over to the last member of our panel, Adrienne Dean Parkmond.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. I'm going to talk briefly about our initiative to serve the long-term unemployed that was actually embraced not only by the governor of Connecticut, but also both sides of the aisle in our General Assembly, and they actually passed some legislation that allows us to actually serve the long-term unemployed. Just by way of background, the workplace serves as Southwestern Connecticut's Regional Workforce Investment Board. We serve a 20-town region in Connecticut that borders the New York border. We're about 30 miles from New York. Our focus on the long-term unemployed actually began in May of 2011 when we learned that about 12,000 Connecticut residents at that time were exhausting 99 weeks of unemployment benefits. At that point, we knew that we had to do something about this issue, but we just weren't sure what we needed to do. The first thing we wanted to do was learn who were the long-term unemployed. And one of the things that we found was that those that were in that category came from all demographics, all education levels, and all ages. The issue generally affected everyone, and we also began to understand that we all knew or know someone who was in this category. And of course, the numbers have increased significantly since the extension of benefits ended this past December. There are now over 150,000 just in Connecticut of long-term unemployed. As you can see from the slide, nearly half of the long-term unemployed are over 55, but also that means that there are half that are under that age as well. So looking at the chart, you can see, again, whether you're educated, uneducated, no matter what race or ethnicity you are, that long-term unemployment has had its impact. Next slide. In order to get a better sense of what the issues were that the long-term unemployed were experiencing, beyond the statistical data that was coming out, we began roundtable discussions with these individuals. What we had is we had individuals sign up in our one-stops or American Job Centers to talk with us about what they were experiencing. We learned a lot from those sessions, and we continue in Connecticut to have them here as well as across the country. We've done probably about 100 of these roundtables, again, in Connecticut and across the country. So what did we find? Well, we found that the ability to believe in oneself was significantly diminished after being out of work for so long. And I think that's something that we all can understand. These individuals have been rejected over and over again when they have no responses to their job application, and that left many people in a place of no confidence. They had no confidence in their abilities, no confidence in their ability to compete. We spoke with all individuals, from executives to middle management, machine operators, healthcare, and education professionals, and what we found was the impact was exactly the same. Depression starts to set in, anxiety and unhealthy coping mechanisms began to emerge as well. There was a clear and convincing need for an employee assistance program for long-term unemployed. In our employment arenas, we all have employment assistance programs for our employees when they're coping with difficult situations. We felt it was important to provide this for those that were long-term unemployed as well. While all this is going on with the number of long-term unemployed that we were having, employers were also beginning to demand more. It's a buyer's market, as we all know, and more competitive factors in terms of getting employment were emerging. We knew we not only had to reduce the employer risk, but also eliminate it. The biggest barrier to long-term unemployed getting the opportunity to compete for employment was their length of unemployment. So the solution had to be an incentive to the employer just to give the long-term unemployed a chance. We were convinced if these individuals had the opportunity to show that they can compete and do the job, then they would be successful. Next slide. Platform to Employment was born. The program was designed to renew and re-energize the long-term unemployed in an effort to get them back in the labor market. Now, no, we weren't necessarily trying to get them back to the same job or at the same rate of pay. This was a platform to employment, to break the cycle of unemployment, and that was our goal. We approached foundations, philanthropic arms of corporations, and individual donors. We raised $600,000, and we billed it as an IPO. And our donors, we call them investors. And we said for $6,000, this is what you can do. You can put a long-term unemployed individual back to work. Give them the opportunity. We provided these investors updates to make sure that they were informed on where their investment was going and what those outcomes were. AARP, Walmart, and City Development were our big funders. AARP, of course, focused on those that were over 50. The Walmart Foundation was focusing on veterans, and City Development had us put in an element of budgeting and coaching for individuals going through the program. So platform employment, it starts with a 5-week coaching and facilitation for job seekers in terms of and by means of workshops. And this is done using a product called Career Edge that was developed by a company in Connecticut called Career Team. And again, the goal is to re-energize and help individuals understand their unique value proposition and what they need to bring to the employer. And how do you look for work today? And how do you get back in the game? Another piece of it in terms of the employee assistance program is we contracted with an employee assistance provider. And we negotiated 5 visits with a mental health professional for the individual and their families, because we know that long-term unemployment doesn't just impact that person who's out of work. The entire family feels the pain. So we had the first session was mandatory and the other sessions were voluntary, but we found there was a high take-up rate for those additional visits. Everything was confidential, of course, but we did get aggregate information, and it helped us to understand what some of the what individuals were going through. And we had some group sessions as well, which provided a lot for the individuals. The last piece of it is our risk-free work experience program. What we do is we, after the person goes through the 5 weeks of Career Edge and they've gone through their employee assistance program, we go out and we say to employers, give these individuals an opportunity. It's risk-free to you. We'll put them on our payroll so they will consider workplace employees, and we subsidize their employment for 8 weeks. The first 4 weeks was completely 100% subsidized, and the last 4 weeks we asked for a match from the employer to reimburse us for a portion of it. Now note, it wasn't a set fee. Whatever the salary of the position, that's what we paid. So whether someone was getting paid $10 an hour or $60,000 a year, we paid that for that individual 100% for the first 4 weeks, and we asked for reimbursement to some extent, and it ranged from 20% to 40% in terms of the reimbursement from the employer. So the employer really enjoyed the opportunity to have this risk-free opportunity. And again, we weren't asking them to create jobs. They were jobs that the individuals were qualified for. They had to go in and they had to interview, and they had to be selected by the employer. We actually did an evaluation that was done by the Harvard Business Partners. They were retired individuals from the Harvard Business School, and what they found when they interviewed in our employers was the employers, what they liked was that we saved them in terms of their onboarding costs. We brought to them individuals who were qualified for the job, prepared, and eager to work. So it's been quite a success in that realm. Next slide. So we have done 10 sites nationwide, because we not only did in Connecticut where we did 9 cohorts of 20 individuals, but we did 10 sites across the country. The outcomes have exceeded the national average in terms of those that are long-term unemployed that return to work full-time. The national average is around 11%. In Connecticut, 81% of the individuals placed in subsidized employment, 81% were placed in subsidized employment, and of those, 88% were hired by the employer. Nationally, on our national 10 sites, 79% of those that completed the 5-week program were placed in subsidy, and 91% were hired full-time after the subsidy ended. So we were very, very excited, and we brought a proposal to the governor of Connecticut, and we want to give high praise to the governor as well as the Connecticut General Assembly. We had bipartisan support for this program. Both sides of the aisle embraced it, and so we will be kicking off a program statewide come July 1st, a statewide platform to employment program. We'll be serving 500 individuals across the state. We'll be partnering with the other 4 workforce boards in Connecticut, as well as the Connecticut Department of Labor and the Connecticut Voc Rehab Agency as well, because we want to make sure we're expanding our base of potential participants. It's a 1-year program, and we are very eager and excited to help get some of the 150,000 Connecticut residents, 500 of those, again, not a big number, but it does create a force so that people will pay attention to the fact that the long-term unemployed are quite qualified and can do the job. So again, Platform to Employment creates a platform of readiness emotionally and physically and professionally for individuals who are long-term unemployed and ready to get back to work. Thank you.
And thank you, Adrienne. I think folks can see that we've had some great successes in the legislative sessions around the country in 2014. We're now going to open it up for questions, and Andrea is going to facilitate that process.
Thanks, Brian. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we will open your line one at a time. Or feel free to type a question in the question box. While we are waiting for questions to come in, I do have one from Robert. And Brian, it looks like you'd be able to answer this. Brian, Robert is wondering if you will be making examples from the speakers today as far as legislative text and other examples, especially bill language, to the present that relate to the presentation of the speakers today.
Yes, the National Skills Coalition, we will be doing that. A couple things that we'll be doing forthcoming. We're going to be posting a blog on our website that will provide more information and links to legislation we spoke about. And we will be soon posting a short paper that goes into a little more detail about some of the legislation that was briefly mentioned but not really gone into in any detail today. And that paper will also provide links so individuals can find the text of the bills.
Great, great. Another question from Jan Hennessy. Will the PowerPoint be made available after the webinar?
And yes, it definitely will be available, and folks will be able to view the slides and listen to the narrative.
Great, great. And we have a hand raised from Emilio Bernard. Emilio, I'm going to open your line so you can ask your question. Your line is now open, Emilio.
Yeah, hi. My question was, I currently live in Puerto Rico, and I was wondering if I could take advantage of the program here.
Perhaps you could clarify which program you're referring to. Are you referring to Platform to Employment?
Yes.
Adrienne, do you want to?
Sure, I'd love to come to Puerto Rico. Maybe you can reach out to me. I don't know if my contact information, I don't think it was on the slide. But it's Parkmond, Parkmond, @workplace, workplace.org. If you reach out to me, we can begin those discussions.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Emilio. Another question came in from Lennox McLennan. Does the Tennessee legislation, I believe this is referring to Brooke's portion of her presentation, does the Tennessee legislation relate to only high school students or adult education graduates also eligible? Brooke?
Yeah, that's a great question. My understanding is that it's for individuals who are graduating from the state's high schools or are completing a homeschool program, but we can double check that and get back.
Great. This question is from Rhonda Basha. Rhonda is asking, I think, specifically of Adrienne's presentation. Did the Connecticut initiative include people with disabilities?
Yes, that's why we're including the Connecticut Vocational Rehabilitation System. In Connecticut, it's combined now. It used to be Bureau of Rehab Services and Board of Education Services for the Blind. They're under one agency now, and yes, it will include individuals with disabilities.
Great, great. These are great questions so far. Please keep them coming in. Just a reminder, you can type them right at your computer or just raise your hand and I can open up your line. The next question is from Jennifer Medina. And I believe this question is for you, Brian. Does the National Skills Coalition assess each state in D.C. on the Career Pathway Initiative, job training, job-driven training investments, system and data alignment, and support for long-term unemployed? Or does National Skills Coalition just focus on doing broad overviews of recent policy actions? So are we looking state by state or broad overviews?
Well, we do both. There are certain strategies that we believe are particularly effective, sector partnerships, state support for local sector partnerships, the building of career pathways for low-skill, low-income adults so they can transition from adult basic education to a post-secondary credential. The development of data and information systems that enable policymakers to see the results of their workforce development programs, view those programs as a system, and make the system more effective. And job-driven investments, targeting state investments to where their jobs are, particularly middle-skill jobs. Those are the four strategies we emphasize, and we work with coalitions, particularly around the development of policy for those strategies. And we do and are willing to go into states and help out around policy development, from crafting legislation where folks would like that assistance, or in other ways providing assistance around those strategies in depth in individual states.
Great. Next question is from Edie Glass. How did you, this is again another question for Adrienne, how did you navigate to the governor's office? I believe she's asking, how did you get to the point where the governor was bought into your program and was able and willing to take it statewide? Did you obtain approval or funding at the city or county level beforehand, before taking it to the governor's office? Adrienne?
No, Connecticut does not have county government, but we've done a lot of publicity around it. We do a lot of, like I said, roundtables, and at every roundtable that we've had in here in Connecticut, we invite not only our local legislators, but we invite our members of Congress. The Lieutenant Governor has been here to hear from long-term unemployed, and that's such a powerful tool, because when they can actually see and hear from the constituents and what they're going through, that made a huge difference. So we've invited members of the governor's cabinet to sit in, and again, I think just getting the word out there and bringing individuals in who are decision makers that can say, hey, this is a program that works, and this is an initiative that we need here in Connecticut, made all the difference. And again, like I said, we've invited legislators on both sides of the aisle. So when it got to the point of, the appropriations, and we had broad support because they had seen it, they had heard of it, and I think, again, one of the things, we had national attention because it was featured on 60 Minutes as well as some of the other national channels as well. So getting the word out there made a big difference. That caught the governor's attention.
Great, thank you. And while we're waiting for more questions to come in, I was just curious to Andrew's presentation earlier in the webinar. I was struck that in order to tackle the issue of kind of bringing more financial aid to adult learners, that what ultimately happened was a study to look more into the issue and not actual funding, even though it does seem like the issue is well documented in existing research. So was there a tactical reason why you went that route of seeking the study versus just an actual appropriation?
Yes, and I mean, really, frankly, we took that approach because the previous approach didn't work out the way that we had first hoped with the reimbursable loan. So the study was kind of, I think, it's a way to keep attention on the issue of part-time adult students, but also we're hoping that the results of that will give us some of that additional data that will kind of help bolster our case, so that we're, both building our case and we'll have a stronger set of answers to work with. We're hoping to be able to know coming out of this exactly who our part-time adult population is, like what their ages are, what their incomes are, what their true level of financial need is, in a way that the state currently doesn't collect that type of data. So again, it's, we don't consider it to be a substitute for better financial aid this year, but it should help us make a stronger case next year.
Great, great. The next question is from Eric. And Eric, this looks like your question is directed to Brian. Actually Brian and Brooke. In your opinion, which states were the most, which state, in the state that you discussed earlier in the webinar and, to your background knowledge, what states made the most significant progress or took the most significant steps in expanding career pathways, sector partnerships, or enhancing graduation rates at their community colleges? What states stand above the rest in that regard?
Certainly hesitant to signal out one state above the others. I think there are many states that made a lot of progress. One state that we didn't highlight today but did a year ago is Iowa, which was able to establish their PACE program that provides approximately $11 million a year to through their community college system to build career pathways and sector strategies. And the Iowa Coalition was successful in having that funding renewed during this current legislative session. So I think that is a very strong program, and this year they proved that it wasn't a one-time deal, that it looks like it will be going, well, definitely for one more year, but hopefully for a long time.
Great, great. And the next question is for Alice. Alice, we were struck by the fact that both business and labor, two unlikely bedfellows, kind of came together to support the bill. Can you explain how that happened? Did it take a lot of work to get them both on board, and what kind of tactics did you use to make that happen?
Well, so I would like to say that that was tactical, but it was probably more accidental. The AFL-CIO was actually much stronger in their support in general and actually called for passage of the bill. The Business and Industry Association supported the intent and certainly was okay with the idea of, in their written testimony said they were okay with prohibition and violations and fines associated with the publication of job postings that were discriminatory in nature. But I don't know that I would say that they were both championing the bill per se. But I think that, you know, there are certainly issues in Connecticut where we can bring labor and business together. We're hoping to do it on other issues like family medical leave, and we did not do it on paid sick days, but we got paid sick days. So I guess it was not, I wouldn't say it was strategic. It was, in fact, I think more accidental, but also it was, nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of this issue per se. I mean, they certainly didn't want to say that they were not in favor of it. And lots of people didn't want to do that, both because of the issue, but also because the governor had come out so strongly in favor of it. So sadly, not a great tactical advantage or activity on our part, but it was nice to see.
Great, great. And following up on that, or at least on the path that the bill took, I know that a lot of times we can't always control how a legislative session is going to unfold. But is there anything that you would have done differently to keep the bill more alive and keep it more in play throughout the session, or was it just one of those things where it's hard to control where the session is going to go?
I would say it's a combination of both. I mean, we really were in the last days of our legislative session really thrown by late calculations about we thought we had an enormous budget surplus, and then all of a sudden we did not. And so much of the energy in the last days of the session was turned to that issue and finding ways in which they could present a balanced budget and get it passed. So it really, there were few things that kind of got past that bigger issue. So I would say it was largely, its fate was largely affected by those issues. There were things that came through in the 11th hour, but more bills did not pass than did, and so I think it just met the usual fate of the last days. But it had made good progress early on. We also have in Connecticut a short session and a long session. Our short session actually only goes from February to May, and that's the session that we were in this year. So its ability to move that far in that short period of time is actually, I think, also a very good sign. Next year we have a long session, which goes January to June. So it's, you know, it has a better shot of making it through the process, certainly.
Great, great. And we have one final question from Jordan Peters. Jordan has a question for Adrienne. Actually, Adrienne, we've got, I'm going to try and give you two questions rolled up into one because they're related in our final couple minutes. Adrienne, are you defining unemployed, the long-term unemployed, as 52 weeks? And if you are, why did you decide to go that route as opposed to defining it as 26 weeks?
Well, we initially defined it as 99 weeks because that's how many weeks Connecticut had at the height of extensions. Right now it is 26 weeks, so we're looking at individuals enrolling in platform to employment, anyone who has exhausted their unemployment benefits. And again, at that point it was 99, but now it's 26.
Great, great. And one last question before I turn it back over to Brian. And again, this is for you, Adrienne. And this is related to actually how the program is carried out. Do you build in skill building that focuses on just general workplace skills or on specific vocational skills?
It's not an occupational or vocational skills training program because our premise is that most people have the skills. It's just that what's their biggest barrier is their unemployment. Once a resume has a huge gap in it, it's automatically tossed aside. So we want to get people jobs in the areas that they have the education, experience, and skills already in. Training is secondary.
Great, great. That's all we have for questions. Again, thank you, everybody, for such great questions, and I will turn it back over to Brian.
Thanks, Andrea. And thank you, members of the panel, and thank you to everyone for joining us on today's webinar. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me or Brooke. There's contact information listed on your screen, and we will be happy to respond or put you in touch with any of the other panelists. You will also receive an email in the next day or so with a link to the webinar recording and the presentation slides. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.